Welcome back. You're watching HFO-TV. HFO-TV is co-sponsored by the construction, repair, and restoration firm J.R. Johnson, the real estate law firm Baljanik LLP, the tax deferral accommodator Beutler Exchange Group, the mortgage banking firm Gantry Incorporated, and forensic building consultants providing building structural science services.
Welcome back to HFO-TV. I'm Greg Frick, partner at HFO Investment Real Estate. Today we're lucky to have back with us again Toija Beutler of Beutler Exchange, one of the leading exchange accommodators here in our market. Thank you so much for stepping back in. And again, for everybody, we're not in the same room. That's why we don't have masks on, so we are hearing hopefully everybody's safe and doing well. And we're getting close to the light at the end of the tunnel with this pandemic. So thank you again for taking the time to do this, Toija. I thought we could talk a little bit about, I know 80% of our transactions in multifamily usually have, an exchange in one component or another, but a lot of clients don't really, we hear about them, but really don't know that, the nuance of a reverse exchange. So I thought we could maybe take a little time and explain that to our audience, what they are, how they're, maybe how they differ, how they don't, and kind of working through that process would be great.
So thank you, Greg, for the opportunity to speak today. Of course, 1031, my favorite and only topic.
That's true.
Yeah, and reverse exchanges, I personally am answering those questions 5 times a day on the phones here. So, what is a reverse? A reverse is when our client is wanting to close on the replacement property before their sale has closed.
So buying the new property first before they close on the other one. Got it. Exactly. Now, is this, as you say, you're getting called on that all the time, is this more so lately than maybe previous years? What's the tenor behind that, you think?
Yeah, so the whole impetus of reverse exchange discussions is our current market. Right. There isn't much on the market. And when they find the right thing, they pretty much have to jump and grab it, even though they haven't sold theirs yet. So it's our market with limited inventory. That's the primary. But of course, it's also that 45-day deadline. In a forward exchange, when they sell, clock starts ticking, right. 180 days, but only the first 45 to identify. Well, they're dreading a 45-day deadline because what if they can't find something? So they're thinking, well, much better to go out and buy something first and then sell later. And I won't sweat the 45, and there's not much inventory. So it's just the market conditions that are driving that conversation.
And so in the nuance and difference of that is, so they're going to find the property they want to go into first, as we say, it's kind of opposite of the ones we're usually involved in, where they're selling a property, they've got the 45 days, they've got 180 days total to close on this new property. This is doing it in the opposite side. So what's the mechanism to do that? I mean, when do they get involved with, calling you? Is it setting up before they write a contract on that property they want to buy, or is it, kind of the beginning when we're all sitting down and deciding what's the best plan?
I recommend that we be talking to them long before they have a contract for replacement property. My statement is sort of when there's a half a thought in their head about an exchange to be talking, because they may be experienced with a forward exchange and that right. processed pretty well, and that didn't seem too bad. And so they're thinking, how hard can a reverse be? Well, we'll talk here in a minute, but it's so much more difficult. And I would really prefer to be talking with folks right at the very beginning of their thinking process. And once I deliver some of the basics of reverse exchanges to them, at least they know what they're going into, eyes wide open, instead of getting blindsided later on when they thought it would work easily, and then they find out how different they really are from the forward. So the sooner the better. It's never premature to be talking to us about these ideas.
And what are some of the challenges? I mean, you just kind of alluded to some of them, that it's, a little bit different, a little bit more cumbersome than a normal, forward exchange. Kind of maybe highlight what some of those differences would be.
Right. So first and foremost, the IRS will let them buy first, sell later, close on the new, then close the old property later. But the rules, they will not permit, the IRS will not allow our client to actually be the owner of both properties at the same time.
Gotcha.
When I say that over the phone to somebody, the response I get, you can, but you can't be the owner of both. Silence. Silence, because that made no sense when she told me I couldn't be the owner of both. And right. They can't, though. They can't. Well, what does that mean? Who will be the owner then? And that's where the exchange company hand goes up in the air. And what happens with a reverse, now a forward exchange, when we're selling first, then buying, we're pretending to sell, pretending to buy. We're paid for some paperwork in closings that are.
But the client's not seeing that because it's all a closing, and it's, all they do know is the money doesn't go to them, the money goes to the accommodator, and yes.
Yeah. reverse, well, they can't be the owner, and so we don't get to use the fiction. And so we end up, we have to own either the new property, which is the typical. Sometimes if that won't work, then we can explore parking. We call these a parking arrangement, parking the old property with us, but we're going to have to own one or the other. Well, they'll own one and we'll own the other. And now we've lost the fiction, and the costs are going to be higher, which we'll talk about in a moment. They can't own both properties. We still, in a reverse exchange, when we're buying first, selling later, we still only get 180 days.
So that timeline's still the same, the 180 days.
That's right. Now, in this market, they'll be able to sell theirs in almost every instance. They'll be able to sell theirs within the 180 because those things are flying off the shelf. But we do only have 180. And then every reverse exchange we do is a custom product because we have to assess all kinds of moving parts while we're the owner of the property. And so they're always custom. There's no cookie cutter for a reverse exchange. And so there's quite a bit of exploration and conversation and back to the lender to try to figure out, can we really put the reverse together? So they can't own both, only 180, and then the customizing that needs to take place before we're ready to become an owner of a property.
If they're buying, so they're doing a reverse, they've identified the property they were going to buy, and they're not going to sell theirs first. You guys end up, on this, say in this example, you end up being the owner of the one they're buying. Yes. So are they, are you, who's signing, so they bring in management company. Is the management company contract with you? Is it with the new owner? And I'd ask the same thing on the lender side. What does the lender look at that?
So this gets to the nitty gritty and all these things we have to assess and customize. But quite typically, if we're buying that new property and our company is going to be the owner, we will, and this is required for the reverse, we're going to lease the property back to our client. Now,
okay.
it's multifamily, then in effect, they're going to be subleasing to the tenants in the building, but we're going to lease the property back to our client so that they will have full control.
So you're going to do a master lease of that property?
That's really essentially
Gotcha.
what it is, yeah. And so while we own, the client has full control under the lease, and they'll be subleasing, and they'll collect the income and they'll retain the income, and they will pay the mortgage, pay the bank every month. So they're going to be in full control, but we're the technical owner. So they might hire a property management company to manage instead of doing it themselves. That's totally fine. And I will tell you this, when we become the owner of a property, we've created an LLC for that purpose, a limited liability company for us to hold, because we would never hold it in the company name, of course. The manager of here's a slick trick. We create an LLC and we make our client the manager.
The manager, got it, okay.
And then that means when we go to closing on that property, our client, the manager of our LLC, will be signing all the loan documents. So the bank gets a pretty seamless experience there that, let's call it Beutler Exchange. Beutler LLC is the owner, but the client's the manager of Beutler LLC. And the bank actually then, and when we get out of the picture, I may be getting ahead of myself, but again, slick. If we are the borrower, our client, the manager, all we do to transfer the property to our client, we don't have to go out and record a deed. No, we just assign the membership of our LLC to the client, who's already the manager.
Got it.
So it's pretty seamless for the client in that respect, for the bank as well, when it comes to financing.
And if the lender's requiring a guarantee, IRS is not going to prevent him from guaranteeing that loan in this 180-day period, right? Okay.
Absolutely permitted very clearly by the IRS to allow our client to be the guarantor on our loan, no problem.
So it's just making sure the lender knows this ahead of time going in, that there's going to be a little, do they add you as an additional insured on the property insurance, or is that?
That's one of our steps, is to make sure that our LLC is an additional insured. And I will say this, that our clients will tell us, well, I told the lender I was going to do a 1031 into this new property. Well, telling your lender you're going to do a 1031 and
they think it's
they think it's a normal, yes, yeah.
It's not a normal deal, but we can always work it through with our local commercial lenders. Well, anywhere in the country. We can work it through with a lender when it's a commercial property like this, commercial loan. We can always work it through where our client effectively is borrowing, but we're the technical owner of the property. The banks will come along with the program.
And what are the other challenges? We've kind of brought up making sure the lender knows ahead of time. Insurance. Are there other big challenges that you see typically on these, other than somebody not planning ahead?
Not planning ahead, that's right. The real one is the lender. So when my client says, We've got financing. I said, I need to talk to your lender as soon as possible. The sooner we hold that conversation, the better. Other potential challenges. I had this question today about tax reporting. While I own the property, would my client be able to take depreciation deductions? Or do I take the depreciation deduction? And I said, neither. Our client doesn't own that property while we do, so they can't take the depreciation. And we are not holding his investment. We're in a parking arrangement temporarily, and we don't get it either. So nobody gets depreciation during our ownership. Further, the interest expense with the lender, the property tax expense, that actually has to go on our tax return.
Goes in your tax return and the LLC's return of the owner.
That's right. Yeah, the 1031, the exchange company is going to show that expense. But then we have this lease, remember, with our client. So our client can't take deductions for interest or property tax, but they will have had a lease payment with us. We leased it to the client, and the lease payment is equivalent
Same thing.
to the interest and to the property tax. So they still get that deduction, but not depreciation. So those tax reporting issues have to be sorted out as well. Environmental can be an issue, certainly from time to time. Also, we find ourselves on properties where our client is in the midst of a partition or a lot line adjustment, and that can complicate what's going on during the parking arrangement.
Well, Toya, that makes it complicated on a normal transaction when they're in the middle of that, doing that. So, yeah.
But then you bring me in too. Yeah,
Right.
Exactly that. So I think those are the basic, and then just the expense of a reverse exchange. And I would tell you that when do we do a reverse exchange? This wouldn't, in your transactions, this is a given. They have to have gain of at least $100,000, or it's not worth doing. We get a lot of transactions in this office where they're selling a single family rental and want to buy a duplex, and they want to buy the duplex first and sell later the single family. Those folks will have lesser gains. And if the gain is under 100, it is not worth it, because the fees to our company, in a commercial transaction, they're probably $9,000 or $10,000 in that vicinity for us to be an owner, because we're not pretending, we really are. LLC expense is nominal. Sometimes the lender is going to send the loan docs out to outside counsel to approve the 1031 language. So there can be quite a few extra expenses to our client in a reverse. So we want to make sure the client has enough gain to justify this expense of a reverse.
As opposed to the cost of a forward exchange, which is,
a forward exchange, we're pretending to sell maybe $1,500. We're pretending to buy maybe $750. It's $2,000-ish, something like that. We're pretending, but in a reverse.
But as they're saying, nothing's cookie cutter on these reverses, so everyone's kind of customized, so there may be more cost involved depending on what your lender says, okay. Our agency and like Fannie and Freddie, are they open to doing reverses in your experience, or is there certain lenders that shy away from this?
Well, if we're talking Fannie and Freddie for 1 to 4 unit, no, they will not do it. So the banks, because we're going to hold that property in an LLC, and Fannie and Freddie 1 to 4 unit LLC non-conforming borrower. So no, on those small properties, they will not do it. And that is really where we hit a brick wall typically. If the client has cash and can cash purchase, they're buying for $800,000 and have $800,000 of cash. Then no problem.
That makes it easy. Yeah.
That's right. The client yesterday though had $400 of cash and needed to finance $400 with Fannie Freddie. No, they're not going to do that. So they're scraping around for another $400 to cash purchase. Of course, that makes it all easier.
But in a larger transaction, are you seeing certain lenders are more apt to do this, or certain ones that are maybe more hesitant, or just depends on the borrower?
Right, it depends on the borrower, but really my experience is that the lenders will always come along. The only place we get into difficulty more typically with like hotels is when our client's getting SBA financing. Okay, SBA is not going to go with the deal, but on multifamily, really all of the lenders we've worked with have been cooperative. They understand the parking arrangement.
Okay, and I've got a client that's looking at doing a forward exchange, has the ability to do a reverse. Their ideas, if it works out, I can do a typical forward exchange. Can they switch midstream that, hey, my transaction I wasn't able to close on what I was selling? Can I switch it into a reverse exchange, and then I know I have 180 days? Is that something we can do?
Yes, and it happens frequently enough that they're set up to sell, and then the buyer gets slowed down or bails, and then you got to buy something. So that's an important point. Reverse exchanges are customized, so they take a great deal more time to set up. When we're setting up to sell in a forward exchange, literally, once we have a title report and a contract, we can have documents to escrow in 20 minutes without interruption. We can slam out those documents fast. But in a reverse, it's going to take a great deal more time because we have to set up an LLC and create operating agreement and one thing and another and work it out with the lender. So I ask for a month in advance notice, and our client, if they're trying to sell something, they'll know a month, usually they'll know a month
Right.
ahead if that buyer is really going to perform. We can do it in 2 weeks, but that's a tight time frame to get the lender on board. So it takes more time to set these out because they're just much more complicated.
But you can't, there's nothing IRS-wise or requirements that you can't switch it if you set one up as a forward and, okay.
Right. If the sale hasn't occurred yet and the purchase hasn't, then we have time to restructure and meet their needs.
And even if they're under, well, I guess they would be under contract on the one they're buying, hopefully there's language in the contract that satisfy the exchange, so.
Right. And I mean, my experience is it's going to be the lender that we have to work it through, that the seller on the replacement is going to be okay with the change of buyer, because all of a sudden it's Beutler and some LLC, the new buyer on their deal. Those sellers are usually fine with.
And there's no issue if the contract originally was written in, XYZ company, and that's the same company that owned their property they're going to relinquish. We have clauses in our language, in our contracts that say, either party may do a 1031 exchange, there's no issue there?
No issue. I mean, if we knew when they were writing that offer for the new
Right.
property that it might be a reverse, we'd simply ask them still to write it in their name. That's correct, but to put in and/or assigns.
Yeah.
Hold open the possibility that we would step into their shoes for vesting purposes. But no, it's never been an issue. It's really the lender piece of it, bringing
big
them
one, okay.
along in a short order. And the other thing too, clients will think, well, if I'm paying Beutler $10,000 for this reverse, then they've got the down payment money. And oh yeah, I'll do that deal. But of course, we're still looking to your client for the down payment money. We have money here, but it's other people's money. So
Right.
we still need them to fund that down payment, even though their sale hasn't.
For all intents and purposes, they're owning the property, having the cash to get the property. They just don't have the, entitlement and, for the short term. What about straddling tax years? If you were to do a reverse exchange, can it straddle a tax year and fall into first quarter of the next year? Is there an issue there?
There's no issue at all. It just means I'm tax reporting their property in the year 1 and then later in year 2 on 2 of my tax returns.
So it may add a little bit of cost because there's tax preparation because the LLC's got to go 2 years of.
Well, true, but we still charge our silly flat rate fee.
Gotcha. Okay, well, that's good.
Anything else? What's the percentage of reverses versus, forward exchanges that you see?
It's a small number because once we explain all this cost and hassle factor, we'll talk about alternatives here in a minute. Of our 100, and I looked, and of the 173 we've set up this month alone, only 5 are reverse. But I talk reverse exchange every day, easily 5 times a day. But in all likelihood, they'll make an alternative approach work for them instead of having to go reverse. We try to avoid it if at all possible.
And what are some of the alternatives?
I would suggest that instead of paying our company $10,000 for a reverse exchange, they go back to the seller of the target property and sweeten the earnest money pot.
Right, see if they can get more time.
Yeah, buy time. Beg, borrow, or steal time from the seller. Or more earnest money, non-refundable. Could they lease the property with an option to buy when their sale does close and they exercise the option? When do they end up doing the reverse? It's when the seller won't wait. It's the to die for property. There's just nothing else on the horizon that's going to work for them. And then there's enough gain in what's being sold. So it's no magic to avoid the reverse. It's just, what does it take to get the seller to wait?
Right, and we see a lot of our clients that if they have the equity in their relinquished property, in cash or something like that, so it's not a quote as big of an issue with the lender looking at it that way. When they find that perfect, exchange opportunity, oh geez, now we want to get rid of this one. So, but again, it doesn't happen. We see it talked about a lot, but actuality, the percentage is pretty low.
Good point. Yeah, and again, people talk about it because the forward was fine, so the reverse can't be much more difficult. And then they find out, and we'll try to find some other way other than a reverse. But 5 this month is all. It's typically about 5 a month.
So I'd be, remorse not to ask, what happens if it doesn't, you buy the deal that we're going to do the, reverse exchange, and now we own this new property. 180 days come, and for some reason the property we were planning on selling doesn't sell. What happens at that point?
Well, here's the good news. Because that sale never closed, there's no tax bill. So what they have done is paid us a fee to try, and a higher than normal fee. They paid us a fee to try. Worst case scenario, we get to the end of the 180-day deadline. We have to deliver back to them the property we have been holding, and we hope they're now the happy owner of 2 properties. And if they ever can get that one to sell, they cannot then use it they have to go out and buy something else. They
Right,
cannot
right.
take that later sale back toward the property that we once parked in the reverse, but there's no tax bill. If they have a forward exchange that fails at day 45 because they can't find something, there's a tax bill. A failed reverse, because that sale never really closed, just they're out a fee trying.
And now does it have to be held for you guys for 180 days? Can they end it sooner?
They can end it sooner. A forward exchange, they cannot end when they wish to, their rules. But a reverse, because the sale hasn't closed,
Right.
we
can
actually have built into our contract, that's right. If they determine at some point in the 180 that this is not going to work for them, they just have to alert us and we will transfer the property whenever requested to do so. We do not have to hold 180.
Perfect, okay. Anything else you think our audience should know about, the opportunity of reverses, other than they should probably get a hold of you before, as early as, they can, so.
Before, please, yes,
Yeah.
exactly. It's not a waste of my time to talk to people about reverses that don't go
Right.
reverse. I think the only thing I'll throw in, although I probably should be quiet about it, there is something called a non-safe harbor reverse. When
Right.
folks know that the 180 days isn't going to work, that they know for some reason their sale won't close in that 180. And we have been willing and have undertaken a non-safe harbor where they're trying to park a property beyond the 180. And those we don't really have clear rules for. We have a guess, and I usually bring in a tax attorney at our client's expense to guide us. But if they need, for some reason, they know their sale won't close in 180, but they really got to jump on this property, and it may be a full year perhaps before their sale can happen, then a non-safe harbor reverse exchange can be considered. And those are like double the cost of, there might be $20,000 for us to be the owner for some period beyond the 180. And they're quite a bit more complicated, but I would alert folks that theoretically there is the possibility of going beyond 180 in a reverse if needed, but it really does take. Most of our exchanges we handle without hands-on from a tax attorney or even
Right.
a CPA often. A non-safe harbor, if they felt compelled to set up an exchange, and it has to set up from the outset, prepared to go beyond the 180, then we've got to get some other experts in on that. But theoretically, there's a way to go even beyond 180.
And is there a deadline beyond the 180? I mean, is it?
We set it up contractually with the client for whatever length of time they feel they might need. So one we had was we set it up for 2 years, but it looks like we're at about 14 months and they're all ready now to sell something. We set it up for a 2-year period, knowing that would be ample time. The way we set these up, we think we can go. Now, I don't want to go for 3 years with somebody, but I think a 2-year, year and a half, 2 years is reasonable.
And so the idea behind that would be just not comfortable that they can get their other property, maybe it's not ready for sale, maybe they're doing improvements to get in within that 180-day window?
Or they're making improvements on the new property. For instance, they're doing new construction on the new property, and so they need us to be the temporary owner while construction is also going on. And we know that that work is going to take a year and a half, and then they'll sell and move over. And so it's often combined with some improvements going on as well, which is why the lengthy time period.
And do the improvements count towards the basis on the property then?
Because we're the owner while they're being placed on it, yes, they do.
Got it, okay, so for like a new construction deal, that may be a way of coming into a deal, maybe it's not completed, or some stage of construction, because a lot of times on the new construction, the value's not there as they're trying to, do it, or, yeah.
Right, exactly that. And if you're talking multifamily, there may not be, it's not stabilized, you can't get your financing and all the one thing and another. So there are certain compelling circumstances where the need might be to go beyond the 180, but that isn't very often.
Right, okay, well, we might have to have a session about safe harbors then, because I know some people have talked about, the ability to trade into, land that's going to be built, and the improvements aren't going to, they have to get the improvements to justify the valuation for a full deferral, so.
And improvement exchanges are quite similar. We do, now I mentioned we do about 5 reverses a month. We will often do something that's a forward exchange into an improvement, that we do 1 or 2 of those a month because of the many requirements of those and the complications.
And what's the structure on those a little bit? I mean, we can jump into that a little bit. I mean, how they differ from a normal, forward exchange?
Well, so from a normal forward exchange where we're selling existing property, buying existing property, pretending to sell, pretending to buy. But if we need to do new construction on the replacement property or major renovation, then once again, the IRS will let our client do that as part of an exchange, but they won't let our client be the owner of that new property. So we have to temporarily own, but again, we only have 180 days of the forward exchange. So the reason we don't do many improvement exchanges is, can you get the contractors in there to do that work within the 180? But when they can, and if things have been planned a year and a half in advance, It's to add value, and our client can't be the owner, so we have to be the owner while that work is happening.
Gotcha. And is that something we could, the idea being we're going to do a forward exchange, doing due diligence on the new property. Oh wow, we just found it's going to need X, Y, and Z. We want to dedicate, exchange money in to do these improvements. Is that when we sit down with you and say, maybe we should make this an improvement exchange? Is that?
Yes, and that's just the same as the reverse. I want to talk to them when there's half a thought of this as a solution to their exchange, their new construction or renovation, because often it takes them, depending on the size of the project, it may take them a year or year and a half to tie up the target property, get the engineering and the architecture and pre-approvals. And so then, because it is only 180 in that scenario, we want to be talking to them a year before when the idea is first being brought up so that we can strategize this in the best way possible. And we follow it through for that year and a half. So then when their sale closes on a Monday, Tuesday, we buy the dirt. Wednesday, the contractor's in there pulling permits and breaking ground so we can get as much work done in that 180 as possible. Takes a lot of events.
And what about on just a maybe not new construction, but a reposition, improvements? The building needs new roof, new siding, but we don't know that until we do an investigation. We're going to close in 60 days. I want more capital to do those improvements. I'm not sure if that's going to, do I just do an improvement exchange? Is that a way to do that? And can I switch my forward exchange to an improvement exchange, before we close on this other one?
Yeah, so we definitely can switch to an improvement exchange before we, everything's under, you do the inspection and now you find out it needs a roof and siding. So we have the ability to switch to an improvement exchange for that purpose. Then though, in that conversation with your client, I'm going to ask what kinds of improvements, because under the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, some of those improvements now, which used to go to basis, some of those now get 100% expensing. And it would be best to do certain kinds of work outside of the exchange to get those write-offs. Roofs, for instance, roof is written off 100%. So we don't really want to do that inside of a 1031. Siding, windows, we'll need their accountant to weigh in. I don't know the TCJA by heart, but we want their accountant to look at the specific work. And yes, if there's work of at least 100,000 or more that it makes sense, then improvement exchange would be appropriate.
And again, I think for all our audience, I think the big key, is just if we can communicate a little earlier. I mean, I've jokingly told clients before, oh, you want to do an exchange, we can do it the day of closing. I don't recommend that, but if we had to, we could. But I think getting you involved earlier is the way to go with everybody. I'm
joking when I say that if I did not get that rush deal, I'd have to lay off a third of the staff. Okay, maybe it's not a third of our exchanges, but no, we can do it. We can, but much better to have had a good, thorough understanding well in advance and don't get surprises later on.
Right. Well, I thank you for taking the time. It was very enlightening. Like I said, we hear a lot about them. We don't see them done a lot, so it's always good to kind of get the nuance of, maybe there's some different options instead of just doing the standard forward exchange. So thank you again for taking the time to do this.
My pleasure.
And we'll see you next time on HFO-TV. Thank you.
Our entire office specializes in multifamily real estate, making HFO the largest multifamily brokerage in the Pacific Northwest. Your success is our passion. Build your legacy with HFO. Call 503-241-5541 or visit our website at hfore.com for more information.